Okay. Well, we'll figure, well, we got the documents coming too.
Okay.
So if you can't, my biggest thing is I just want you to see where you're gonna be pulling from.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I don't know if it's because I was trying from the tablet, maybe.
So if you open up an opportunity, let me see where these papers are.
Why? Yeah, maybe it's just that problem. Thanks. I was trying to do everything. Oh, well.
All right, so we're gonna go over the list. When you're sitting in front of a client, there's no reason you should not be able to hand them the paperwork and go over it. Because you should be in front of a client. Question for you, and I think I know the answer, which may create a little bit of an issue. And I'll discuss that with you guys today.
Okay.
Are you licensed?
No.
That's an issue.
Okay. Should I leave?
No,
Oh, okay.
I'll have to talk to Ashley though.
Okay.
Because she's actually got new paperwork.
Because, I mean,
Yeah.
but I,
Just so we're all on the same
yeah,
page.
no, she does, but I just,
Okay.
I send it to you.
So in Maryland, when you have a listing, you're gonna need a lot of different documents because Maryland has a lot of different documents. One of the first documents you're gonna need, depending on who you talk to, first one I think you should use is dual agency. Because when you're listing a property in Maryland and you want agents from our office to be able to see it, you have to have dual agency. If you don't have a signed dual agency, then you can't let them see the house. You can't shut the phone. Okay? Now, if you're on a team, which Jen, you guys are a team, there's actually another form that's called notice of agency within a team. Dual agency within a team. You have to have that one. The reason you have to have that one is because the person that's looking at the properties, if they happen to be looking at one of Ashley's, and I don't know, I always forget his name.
Ty.
Who?
Ty.
Ty. I don't know why I always forget his name.
He's not around.
He doesn't come in much,
Yeah,
that's
he's not
why.
around much.
But anyway, when he's showing a property and it happens to be one of Ashley's, you already have to inform the person that's looking that you guys are on a team and that dual agency is going to occur. And that he's got the permission from the seller to show the property, knowing that you guys are on a team. Because there's a financial advantage for the agents involved, not for the seller or the buyer.
Right.
Because they're gonna keep the whole commission. They're not gonna, it's not gonna be split. Like, as an individual agent, I can say if I'm the only agent that writes the offer, I'll reduce the commission. Obviously, on a team, they're not gonna do that. So, those are the two most important ones that you need. Now, depending on which attorney you talk to, you will need understanding who agents represent. Okay? You're going on a listing. There's two schools of thought. Chuck Caskey is an attorney with the Maryland Real Estate Commission and the Maryland Association of Realtors. His thought on it is And they did away with understanding, because it used to be that you'd have to have 4 of these. One for the seller, one for the seller's agent to the buyer, one for the buyer's agent, one for the buyer's agent to the seller. Okay? So there'd always be 4 of them floating around. And they said, wait a minute. If you have a written listing agreement with a person, they're not unrepresented, therefore you don't need the understanding who your agents represent. Follow me so far? If you're a buyer's agent and someone calls on your listing, okay, so you're presumed a buyer's agent because they called on your listing and you're going to meet them. Maryland says there's no such thing as a presumed buyer agency. You have to give them this understanding agency because you cannot represent them as a buyer. You can only represent the seller. So if it's your listing, they have to know that they are unrepresented from the time that you get there until they're done. Even if they want to write an offer, they're not represented. You can offer representation by giving it to somebody in the office as a referral. Or most times you're going to find that situation with an investor. They don't care. They understand. They've done this a bunch of times. But if it's like a first time home buyer, and I've done it before, where it was my listing, they called on it, I showed them the property, and I let them know, you're not represented. I can write the offer. The only thing it's going to do for the seller is it's going to reduce his commission a little bit. That's it. They agreed to it. You cannot get. She can't give me the class. You can just sign down.
It says recording.
Okay, so where was I? So you can write an offer for somebody as long as they understand that they are not represented, and it will be clearly marked on here that you're representing the seller and the seller only. And they will sign it. You won't be doing a buyer agency agreement at that point because you can't represent the buyer. Now, there's another way that you can do this as well, because there's another form in Maryland that actually terminates your listing for that particular buyer if you want to represent the buyer. I'm conflicted with that because you already know a lot of things about the seller. You already know a lot of things about the house. And if there's no dual representation in Maryland, and you terminate your listing agreement with the seller to work with the buyer, I find that as a conflict. Most people would. But Maryland says you can do it. You can terminate your listing agreement with the seller, have the seller be unrepresented, and then you represent the buyer. What's that do for you? That allows you to pull comps to show them whether or not the property is priced correctly. It allows you to recommend certain inspections, and it lets you off of the hook as far as the seller goes. So if you recommend that they have home inspection or mold inspection or any of that, and if you have prior knowledge of anything in the house, the seller might get a little irritated. But Maryland does have that form. As soon as we have them back here, I'll tell you what it's called. I can't remember the name of it. I don't usually see it too often. If you're working with a family member, you do need the disclosure of a licensee status, letting everybody know that you're working as a representative of a family member or for yourself. If it's your house, you got to fill this form out. If it's your dad's house, your mother's house, your brother's house, your sister's house, aunt's house, uncle's house. You gotta fill it out. Doesn't matter.
What's the name of that one, sorry?
What's that?
The one you talking about, the family?
That's the disclosure of licensee status. And then we're gonna get into the exclusive right to sell. So when you have an exclusive right to sell, you don't need understanding agency, because understanding agency, the person that's selling is not unrepresented. You're representing them. You've got written agency. Okay? So Maryland, help. Anybody confused yet? No?
Yes.
Okay. Then we're on par. On the listing agreement, you're gonna fill out, and this is what it'll look like. You'll fill out all this information. A lot of people don't like to fill it out because, well, the broker looks at it. Maybe he'll get the phone number. I want all that information on there because if I get a call from either another agent or from a seller, I want to know who I'm talking to and how to get a hold of whoever I need to get a hold of. These people do call me. And when they call me, I don't always call and talk to you unless I feel the need to. At which point, if it's a bad call, chances are I'm gonna call and say, okay, what's going on? So always try to do that ahead of time, let me know ahead of time, but fill that information in. It's important, okay? It's so I have a number. You go on vacation, they can't get a hold of you. So they call in here to complain to your superior, which happens to be, unfortunately, me. I'm not really a superior, but they're gonna call and wanna talk to me. And I'm gonna pull this up, and if I don't have it, I'm in a lot of trouble. I don't know what they're talking about, I don't know who they are, I don't know what property it is. And they'll tell me all that stuff, but it's gonna make me look like an idiot. Because I don't know. That's why it's important that this stuff is in command when your listing goes active, so I can get in there and see it. If there's errors on it, I'm gonna send it back to you, but at least I can still get into it. I'll worry about the errors later. So once you fill that information out, which is basically the date, which is the very first thing that you're gonna put on it, the sellers, their home number, cell phone number, most people will just have cell phones anymore, email address, and then you're gonna put the broker information, which broker information is the name of the company, the office address, your name, your telephone numbers. Okay? Not me. And then you're gonna put the property that's being listed, which may be different from their address. Okay? And I did skip a step. So when you're in DocuSign, what you're gonna do, when you go to look this document up, it will be called the exclusive right to sell. Okay? You just reminded me because you were up on there.
I thought we were getting a copy of it.
We are. She's just sorting them. Because originally, everyone was supposed to register, and originally, I think we were only expecting like 1 or 2 people. So she's making more. In Washington County, most of the counties that you guys are gonna be working in, Washington County, Frederick County, Allegheny County, Garrett County, maybe, I doubt it, but maybe. All property is pretty much listed in fee simple. Because the option is there under number 3, either it's in fee simple or it's subject to an annual ground rent. The only place you're really gonna see ground rent is if you get down around Baltimore, in Howard County, and some in Carroll County. Oh, thank you. Okay, the one that I was telling you about, where you can tell the seller that you're gonna be representing the buyer, not them, is that very first one, agency change acknowledgement. This just lets them know that you're currently representing a buyer and you previously acted as a listing agent for that person. And that the information that you guys have discussed still has to remain confidential. And you can't disclose that to a buyer. And that's all this is, just an acknowledgement of that. So back to the exclusive right to sell. So you get down around Baltimore, Howard County, Carroll County, those are the three counties that if you list a property, you need to know if it's in fee simple or if there's ground rent. Maryland is trying to do away with ground rent. Okay. With ground rent, they have to know how much they have to pay every month. Ground rent runs with the property forever. Never goes away until they slowly do away with it. These are all the addendum, aren't they? Right. There's the consent renewal agency, coming back. There's the exclusive right to sell. Under number 4, you're going to put the listing term. How long? Typically, I do them for a year. Even in a fast market, I do it for a year. Because you don't know what's going to happen. So the first thing you'll put is effective on today's date. And then I'll put exactly 1 year later. A listing agreement?
It can be whatever you want.
Whatever you want it to be.
Oh,
The only place it's different is in Pennsylvania. It has to be less than 1 year. So you'll put the dates that you're gonna have it active. If you only wanna do a 3-month listing, you can do that. I wouldn't advise a 3-month listing. Unless the gentleman's French. Jacques. And then under Maryland law, you have to put how a person can terminate. Now, because we actually pay for the photographs and the sign up, sign down. There's an admin fee. Maryland, you're not allowed to charge an admin fee. Has to be considered an additional commission. So with an additional commission, what you're going to be looking at is the office minimum is $195. So what I do on a listing is I will put on here that they can terminate by submitting written notice to the broker of record along with a $295 early termination fee. They can terminate the agreement by providing written notice to the broker of record along with a $295 early termination fee. That $100 that I get if they terminate it really is not a whole lot considering everything that I've already done. I've already done CMA, I've already ran to the house probably a couple times, looked at the house, spent some time with them. So that $100 really ain't much.
When you have a termination, do you get a lot of flack for that?
No.
Can you do that in PA also?
Mm-hmm. West Virginia is really nice. You can charge up front. Mm-hmm. If you want. They allow you to do that. We've got a third Keller Williams Premier going in. But you have to have the terms on how they can terminate. Okay? I have seen some people base it on however many months it's been listed when they terminate. If it's been listed for 4 or 5 months, they've not gotten any offers or anything like that, chances are it wasn't listed appropriately to begin with. So if they want out, at that point, I will usually just whatever. Listing price, you're gonna put in here the listing price, that's that blank that you fill in. And then you'll put the showing instructions, if there's a lockbox and how they access it. Any questions so far? And the listing term, it explains that when they terminate, for the entire term, that $295 is gonna be payable no matter when they terminate. So if they terminate and they sell the house as a for sale by owner within that termination time, they're still gonna have to pay $295. Are you gonna keep an eye on that house to make sure? It's up to you. I'm not. I've got more important things to do. Marketing, this one is really important. Everyone seems to get this one incorrect. So now with the age of the internet and all the IDX feeds that are going out there for listings, that's what number 7 goes over. That if you're gonna put it into an MLS, and you're gonna put a lockbox on it, there's appropriate paperwork that needs to be filled out. This is part of that paperwork. They need to understand that you're going to put it in the MLS, which has an IDX feed. It's gonna submit it out to a lot of different websites. It's gonna put their address out there. It's gonna allow people to make comments about the property if they know anything about the property. I don't really see that too much. I don't think I've ever run across it where somebody's made comments. So I don't usually typically worry too much about that. But it is still the seller's choice if they want that to happen. If they don't want that to happen, you'll see that box that says the seller may elect not to have the property listing displayed on the MLS at all. If that's the case, they need to initial that. They'll need to initial where it says the broker may not submit and market the property through the MLS. And then they also have to initial at the end of the paragraph because they're acknowledging that they've just made your job impossible and you can't advertise it other than word of mouth. And they need to initial that. That's the only time they initial those 2 boxes.
Does that happen a lot?
Huh?
How many times does that happen? How often does that happen?
Usually it does not happen at all. I've seen 1 or 2 come through. If they've initialed either one of the, well, they should initial both in that box, then they have to go down to C. And the seller may elect not to have the property listing or the property address displayed. So if they're not going to allow the address to be displayed, maybe they don't want the address to be displayed, but everything else is okay, they will initial there. If they initial that the address is displayed or not to be displayed, then what you're going to do is have them initial at the bottom of the next paragraph where they acknowledge that having selected either or both of the above, not to allow the information on internet websites, a consumer who conducts searches for listings on the internet will not see the corresponding information. So if they choose not to put the address on the listing, and if they choose not to allow an estimate of the value, that would be removed. Sometimes you'll go into RPR or Zillow and you'll actually see that the estimate is removed. I don't know what Zillow will do now that they are an agency. Because they're gonna have to really watch that.
What about partial addresses? Like just the name, I guess the neighborhood, instead of the actual number of the street?
You can put the neighborhood, but it's really not gonna do any good if the house number's not there.
I know, but if
Isn't
they
it-
want to do it that way.
Yeah, in a lot of neighborhoods, all the houses look the same. Chances are, they're not going to initial any of those.
Do you have to put NA if they don't do anything, or just leave them?
No, leave those blank. Okay, because those are for initials. Under item D, 1 and 2, you'll see on the bottom that the seller authorizes or does not authorize the display of unedited comments. So I can't really control what people comment on online. So I encourage them to authorize it, because otherwise I'm gonna be in violation of the contract if somebody does make a comment. And then the same thing with the next one. If the seller authorized or does not authorize an automated estimate. Not all websites will pick up the exact IBX feed that's coming from the MLS where it excluded certain information, and it will still throw an estimate out there. So just to cover myself, I convinced them that they should go ahead and authorize it.
What do you say to them?
I just typically tell you to just authorize it, because I don't have control over other people. If I did, it would be really great. Coming soon status. A lot of people don't really understand the coming soon status, and almost everybody out there that currently uses it is using it incorrectly. And when I say that, coming soon is used, this allows the seller that if you're there on a listing appointment and you want to get their signature on this listing agreement before you leave, you can do that. If they say, well, I'm not ready to sign anything, I need to still paint the bathroom, or I gotta put carpeting in the basement or whatever, that's great. We've got coming soon that we can put it into. We can go ahead and sign everything today. You tell me when you think you'll have that done. And we can put it in and draw attention to the property for people that are looking at property. What that means is it'll go into the MLS, that's coming soon. When you're ready, it'll go active. In the meantime, agents will be able to send it to their clients. They will be able to see that it's coming soon, but you can't show it. Can't be shown until it goes active. Now, what happens if somebody submits an offer to you sight unseen? You gotta present the offer. Maryland says you present all offers. So if they submit an offer to you sight unseen, call them up, say you got somebody that wants to submit an offer on your house. Here's the offer, and present it to them. If they accept that offer, now you gotta take it from coming soon to pending. Now you just pissed off a lot of agents. I've had agents, I've had this already happen, and it's completely legal. As long as nobody's been there to see that property, you've not shown it, nobody else has shown it. The sellers know that they were not allowed to show it. Somebody submitted an offer sight unseen, and they accepted it. I'm sorry. Was your buyer going to submit an offer sight unseen? Most of them are gonna say, well, no. This one did. And in the situation that it came up, the person that wanted to buy it was actually a friend of the sellers. They had already been in the house. They've gone there many times. They knew about the house. They knew the issues that were already there. They didn't care. Submit my offer. So they kind of had a little bit of an advantage. But that's legal. So they will initial here if it's going into the coming soon status. In Maryland, you're not allowed to discuss other properties at an open house. The only house that you can discuss is the house that you're showing the open house at. Unless they had given you the consent to discuss other property. So if you're at an open house, and they will test, they do send testers. If you're at an open house, you've got your little display set up for knowing who can and who can't discuss what you can and can't discuss. And they come around and they test, and they'll ask you about, well, what about the house down here? What are you gonna say?
Depends on if they have signed or not.
Depends on whether or not this is signed, if you can discuss it. But if they said that you don't have permission, the only thing you can say is, you know, right now, I don't know a whole lot about that property, but I can tell you all about this one, and later on, we can meet up and maybe discuss that property, once I get some more information. And they just figure, just gotta look it up. Property data. So any property data to the broker, they have the unlimited right to use the property data. What is property data? That's going to be the deed, that's going to be pictures, it's going to be video tours, it's going to be anything that you can think of about that property. You can use the images of that property, the address of that property, and all that. This gives them permission to use that, for you to use that information to sell their property. You can also continue to use that same information after the property is sold and it's a new buyer. If the buyer calls in and requests that you remove that information, you have to, because you don't have their permission. Home security systems in Maryland. You're not, if you have a home security system that takes film footage and records voices, you cannot allow the system to be recording while people are visiting the home without their knowledge. So in order to make sure that you're following the law on this and your seller is following the law on this, if it records, as long as they're not recording voices and they can't hear anything that's being said, that's acceptable. The penalties for recording them as they're going through the house with voice, I think starts somewhere right around $5,000.
Those cameras are everywhere, the rings, the.
Really?
Yeah, they are.
So you just tell them,
It is worth it.
sellers to take
I
it
don't
off.
know one.
Yeah, they can,
Some of them can record voices, some don't.
yeah, they can.
It just depends.
Depends on which one, yeah.
And they have to disarm being able to record the voice.
Oh,
Cannot record the voices. They can see who's coming and going. They can see them walking around the house. You know, that's how they catch some people doing crazy things. Some of them are even agents. Some of them are, I'm just like, you know, there was an agent in Virginia, he got caught going through a woman's wardrobe. Really? I mean, yeah, it was pretty sad. I mean, he pulled her panties out, looking at him, and like, they got it all on film, and they flashed the name of the real estate company on ABC News Tonight.
So he took everybody down
And
with him.
it was like-
Yeah.
So much for that office.
Yeah.
It's gone. So,
Is there a difference between indoor and outdoor?
no, they can't. If they have any recording devices, they cannot record voice. They have to disarm that. It's pretty hefty fine if they get caught. And if they take it to court, because something happened and they have the voices, they're gonna lose big time. Fair housing, any property that you show, you're gonna show it to anybody and everybody. What I like to say is everybody's green. Your money's spent just as well as mine, so it doesn't matter. I have run into situations where I've gone on listing appointments and I'll either end up not taking a listing, or I actually talked some sense into them, where they've said, the one guy, and I asked him, I said, well, what difference does it make? He did, there was a particular person, one person, that he knew was gonna come look at this house. He did not want that person looking at the house, because he was not gonna sell it to him. And I said, wait a minute. And it just so happened to be, his current daughter's ex-husband, because he always said he wanted to buy the house. But lo and behold, I said, well, what difference does it make? Are you gonna live with him?
You're gonna know.
Well, no. So then just be real firm on the price. Make him pay for it. Oh, well, I guess so. He came and saw it. He put an offer on the house. He didn't accept it. And I was like, really? He said, just the more and more I thought about it, I can't. Okay. And he took it off the market. He's still living in it now. And now he's like, oh, I should have taken it. Seller's responsibility, make sure that the seller understands they have to keep all utilities on up through closing. They've got to keep the property insured, and all that good stuff. So they can cancel their utilities for the day after closing. So closing is going to be on the 10th of February. They can have their utilities turned off on the 11th. They have to keep them on through the day of closing. Water and sewer in Maryland will be done by the title company, so you don't have to worry about that. Cable. Cable is a big issue for some reason if they're dealing with Antietam Cable. Antietam Cable will not allow somebody to find the property to put cable in their name for a certain date until the seller has called and said that they're canceling their cable from a certain date.
Did you say water and sewer taken care of by the county?
No, water and sewer is taken care of by the settlement company,
Oh, settlement, that's right.
so they don't have to worry about that. All repairs need to be performed by a licensed contractor. So if you do a home inspection and you find issues that the buyers want to have repaired, you submit to the listing agent, those repairs have to be done by a licensed contractor. No exceptions. Will Harry homeowner say, I can fix that? Sure he will. But you as the listing agent need to let him know that if he does, he's in violation of the contract, and the buyer therefore can declare the contract null and void and get out of the contract. Broker's compensation. This is always going to be the same no matter who you're talking to. Company policy is you cannot sell a home for less than 5% plus the $195 additional commission. What I always write in here is 6% of the gross sales price plus $295.
That's the early termination fee?
No. That's the additional commission. And that's what it's called. So if the property sells, they're gonna pay 6% of the gross sales price plus $295. The only time you can't charge that $295 is if it is a veteran and he's selling his house. If during the term of the agreement, the seller decides he's gonna terminate it for whatever reason, you are still due compensation. So you need to make sure that they are aware of that. If they were to get with the buyer and you got, they do a little side deal, they'll cut the agents out of it. It doesn't work that way, you're still gonna be charged.
So with the veteran, if it is a veteran, because the 295 is the one that covers the pictures and everything, so what does that, does the agent pay for that one?
If it's VA, no. The office basically eats it.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
But I have yet to see anybody not pay that, even if it was VA,
Oh, really?
on a listing. But I still slide it in there,
The
just
office-
because I'm used to doing it.
Oh, okay. And the office fee is $195.
$195.
But you add the additional 100.
Mhm.
Okay. I just was making sure. Thank you.
That helps pay for my assistant. She gets bonuses whenever we close things. Now, the next spot is going to be if during the period of blank days. The other thing that you're gonna, that's one thing of the buyer days. During the period of blank days following the expiration or the termination of this agreement, I would put 90 days. So if that buyer does come to you, Mr. Seller, and says, let's do away with our real estate agents and we can make a better deal on the side, and you do that, you still owe me a compensation if it's within 90 days. So you're gonna have to wait for 90 days before you sell the home. The only time that doesn't apply is if you list it with another real estate agency, which is basically what that paragraph says. If there's a deposit placed on your property because we go under contract, and that contract falls through for any reason, then I'm going to hold 50% of that deposit, and you'll get the other 50% if it's being retained by you. So that's the next two blanks. It's either a flat dollar amount or a percentage. I always put 50%. So if they put $1,000 deposit, buyer puts $1,000 deposit. Seller's entitled to the $1,000 deposit. You hit the buyer back down at the last minute. We're gonna keep 50% of that and give him 500. We're gonna keep 5, they're gonna get 5.
Right, is this the escrow?
That was the earnest money deposit that was put in, and the buyer defaulted, so he's not due his deposit back. Now, the chances of the buyer defaulting in Maryland are very slim. Does happen, but I'd say probably 98% of the time, the buyer's gonna get his deposit back no matter what.
And you want to put NAs for these spots?
No.
Okay.
Because it's either gonna be the dollar amount or a percentage, you're just gonna put the percentage. Next thing is the authorization to cooperate with other agents or brokers. You'll see there is a fee for a buyer agent, there's a fee for a sub-agent, and there's a fee for anybody else. What's a sub-agent? Sub-agent in Maryland is an agent that works for another real estate brokerage that does not have written buyer agency agreement. Now, in Maryland, if you don't have a written buyer agency agreement, you're not to be showing anybody properties unless you're working for the seller. Okay? So, if they don't work in this office, we're not gonna pay them. Simple as that. We will pay somebody that has a buyer agency agreement with someone. So you put down the broker's comp, the buyer's agent compensation. Speaking of compensation, we don't typically we don't discuss compensation. You can pay a buyer's agent whatever you want to pay a buyer's agent, as long as it's disclosed in the MLS what the buyer's agent is receiving. Sub-agent is going to be zero, buyer's agent is going to be a certain amount. I have seen agents that charge 6%. They'll keep 3.5% for themselves and pay the other agent 2.5%. If you do that, you'll be known as one of those agents. And you may find it's a little bit more difficult sometimes to get listings, and definitely going to be a little bit more difficult to get people to show your listings, because people just aren't going to want to sit across from you and say, well, wait a minute, I did just as much work as they did, and they're not going to split it with me equally. As long as it's whatever you put in the MLS as the advertised price, that's what you got to pay them. What I do on short sales is I will advertise it. I always listen to the 6%, and I will advertise it as 2.5%. And the only reason I do it that way is because the lender that is in charge of the short sale will determine how much compensation is being paid. We don't. We submit the listing to them and they see that it's 6%, but they may only pay 5%. So if you've said you're paying the buyer agent 3% and they're only paying you 5%, you're only getting 2%. Now you're in a whole world of trouble, because you've just sold a house for less than what's permissible by the office without permission, and you're going to be charged at 2.5%, even though you only get 2%. So on a short sale, what I do, and I make it a practice of doing this, is I'll charge the 6%. Buyer's agency goes in at 2.5%, and when we close, they'll get 3%.
Where do you note that though? Do you note that in the MLS?
No, but the only thing that's noted in the MLS is the 2.5%. I just do it that way.
Oh, okay.
I equally split the compensation.
Okay.
Yeah, because one, on a short sale, their buyer may have been waiting. I had one buyer that waited 3 years for a house. 3 years.
Short sale.
Yeah, that was a short sale. The only thing that was short was the amount that they paid off. Wasn't the time frame. Can everybody hear me? Give me a thumbs up. Okay. Okay. So that's where you're gonna put down the authority to cooperate with other brokers. If it's a sub agent, we're not paying them anything. If it's a buyer's agent, we're gonna pay them. And if it's a, in the MLS, there's another type of agency, we're not paying them anything either. The only person we pay is buyer agency. Ministerial acts, that's somebody that's just gonna be filling in the blanks. That's what you do. And this allows us to do it. The deposit is going to be held by an escrow agent. If the deposit is held by somebody other than the brokerage, in Maryland, there is an escrow agreement that has to be filled out. All parties have to agree to that person holding it. Title companies in Maryland do not have to disperse the deposit in any particular manner. they can do what they want with the deposit. So if the title company has already done title work and the title company's holding it, they can keep part of that for the title work that they completed. They have to sign the escrow agreement in Maryland that says they will cooperate and do it. So the mutual release has to be signed and that they won't collect any fees from it. Smoke alarm notice, your sellers have to know. There is a form that's in our documents. It's a nice little color form that, and I don't know what it's called, so don't look for it. Because it is in our own separate documents. It's not in the MAR documents, which is where you're gonna be pulling other documents from. It's gonna be a separate folder, and it's just a little color flyer that explains the smoke detector law in Maryland. So the smoke detector law in Maryland says that all smoke detectors in the home have to be a 10-year sealed battery. If the home is hardwired, as long as the smoke detector is not older than 10 years old, it can have a 9-volt battery. But the date will be on there. And once those are gone, once those are all 10 years old or older, they need to be gone. It's the seller's responsibility to do that. If they don't have smoke detectors on each level of the home, they can be fined up to $1,000 or imprisoned for up to a year.
It's only one per floor? Doesn't matter if it's.
That's the minimum. You have to have them outside of bedrooms. I think now you even have to have it in the bedroom.
Is that on new builds though?
Yeah. And you have to have one in the basement. If it's got a basement, it has to have one in the basement.
So where's the flyer? Would we print those on paper with us on them?
Yeah, you'll print it out. Number 19, lead-based paint. Maryland loves lead-based paint.
2 forms at least.
We have 2 forms for lead-based paint. Oh, somebody's
I
scrolling
was
along
saying,
for us. Good.
there they got it, yeah.
So, lead-based paint, number 19. You need to initial if it was built prior to 1978, during or after 1978, or they're uncertain of the date that it's constructed. Yes, they have to initial that. If it was during or after 1978 in Maryland, you still have to do the lead-based paint forms. If it was built before 1978, the next section goes into the renovation and repair. If they're going to be doing any painting, they have to be, as a homeowner, they can do their own painting, but they have to follow EPA guidelines on painting. And it's 6 square feet inside, 20 square feet outside. If they're going to be doing more than that, then they have to scrape, sand, prime, and paint in accordance to the EPA guidelines. Which means they have to encapsulate the area that they're working and all that good stuff. So they need to brush up on the EPA guidelines, even if Harry homeowner is going to paint the house himself. Better off just hiring a contractor if something comes back. They're going to initial down here. You told them that. That's all that means. You told them that. Seller acknowledges that the seller has read and understands the provisions of 19B. Notice regarding disclosure of deferred water and sewer. In Maryland, in the places where you see new developments that go in, a lot of times there's a deferred water and sewer charge because the builder may have put water and sewer in for the state or the county fronted the money to the builder to do it and they want paid back on it. That's what's gonna happen. Out in Morgansville, there is, I can't think of the name of the place, but there's a development there. They have deferred water and sewer. And that's off of Morgan's Avenue. There's another one off of Searcross Pike where they have deferred water and sewer. They're newer developments.
Is that a monthly fee? that they
It's quarterly. It'll be added on to their water and sewer
pay?
bill,
Oh,
okay? If the seller does not disclose, and they know whether they got it or not, if they don't disclose that they have that deferred water and sewer to pay, they're responsible to pay it for up to 5 years after closing. So make sure your seller knows and he's informed that that's gonna happen. And, oh, you forgot to tell him, sorry, you gotta pay for it for the next 5 years. Whether you live there or not. And then there's a little box form that the seller acknowledges that the property is or is not served by public water or wastewater for which a deferred water and sewer charge has been established. They need to initial that. 21, authority to disclose existing offers. This paragraph says that you, Mr. Seller, are going to allow me to disclose to or not disclose to potential buyers whether or not there's multiple offers. They're gonna look at you like a deer in headlights. What do you want me to do? What should I do? It's up to you. If, and this is the way I explain it, if you authorize us to let others know that there's multiple offers, then when they call and ask me, do you have any other offers? I'm gonna say, yes, we have multiple offers. Please submit your highest and best offer. Now, if you don't want to give me that authorization, if somebody calls me and asks if we have offers, the only thing I'm going to tell them is that they need to provide us with their highest and best offer. I didn't say that we had any other offers. I just said, you got to provide us with your highest and best offer. Home warranty, we do offer a home warranty. The seller can pay for it for the buyer and also get coverage for themselves, which really helps out in selling the house because there are items that may come up on the home inspection that might be covered under the home warranty. But it's their choice, but you're always going to put that we do offer it and they either desire it or they decline it. Property condition, all sellers have to provide a disclosure disclaimer statement to a potential buyer. Everybody seems to think if they're flipping a property, they don't have to do that. Yes, they do. The only people exempt from the disclosure disclaimer law are foreclosures, because it's a bank, sheriff's sale, because of it being a tax sale, a new construction, because it's not been issued an occupancy certificate. If it's a guardianship that is taking care of somebody that lived in that property, or an estate. Those are the only 5 people exempt from disclosure disclaimer. If you are working with somebody that is exempt from the disclosure disclaimer, do not put it in your listing. They are exempt.
Don't put the disclosure disclaimer in there.
Correct. If they are exempt, it does not go in there. They are exempt. There's another document that they will sign off on, which is why it goes through. If they're not exempt, which most people are not, they're going to initial not exempt. If they are exempt, they're going to initial that they're exempt. Violations and notices. This says that the seller is going to sell the property to the buyer without any violation, any code violations or notices that have been submitted to the seller to the buyer. Conservation easement. If the seller has a conservation easement on his property, they will usually know, depending on which type it is, they need to initial. If it's not, then they're going to initial here, that they don't have any. If it is then you need to pick which one it is. And they should know. You will be able to find out when you pull and do some research on the deed. But you should do some research on the deed, which you can do under the Maryland Land Rec website. Which you'll sign up for an account with them. It's free. Wish Pennsylvania was like that. Insurability. The house has to be able to be insured. So if your current seller has insurance on the property, it's always a good idea to find out who they have their insurance through. Biggest time that this becomes an issue is if they have a wood stove, because there's some insurance companies that your buyer might get a hold of that will not insure the house because it's got a wood stove. Find out who their insurance company is, so as a last resort, they can go to that insurance company and it can be insured. Okay. Flood disclosure notice. If it's in a floodplain, the seller has to let a buyer know whether or not it's in a floodplain because it's going to cost the buyer more money, and it could be a great deal more money. If they're a non-resident of Maryland, they're going to be charged taxes on the sale of the property. Sometimes you'll come across somebody that lives in South Carolina that just moved there. If 2 of the last 5 years or 3 of the last 7 years, this was their primary residence, they're not an out-of-state. There's no tax that's going to be collected on, but it had to be their primary residence. If it was a rental property, they're going to be charged 8% for non-resident, 8 1/4 for an entity. So if he had it in an LLC or something like that, they're going to charge him that. And then he'll have to file taxes later to figure out whether he owes it or not. Any questions so far?
I had a question. So you said with the broker, what we offer a home warranty?
Mm-hmm.
Like our brokerage offers a home warranty?
Mm-hmm. We have AHS,
What is that?
American Home Shield.
But,
It runs about $800.
okay, so the seller would.
The seller would pay for that,
Pay for that.
unless you want to buy it for the seller.
Okay, well, that's what I just.
I mean, it happens.
Okay,
There's been times I've bought them. If it's gonna hold, if it's gonna hold a deal together.
Yeah.
Okay, $800, yeah. Unless it's $5,000 home.
okay.
Yeah.
But they could go through their own home warranty, right, if they ordered.
Yeah, they can buy a home warranty from anybody they want, but the one that we offer a couple of them. The biggest one that I usually just tell them to buy because the one I found has been the best is AHS.
$800.
Roughly,
We have,
brochures and all that stuff.
thank you.
Foreign investor, if they are a foreign investor, they're gonna have to pay the FERPA tax, which is this. If the person is a foreign investor or a foreigner, they're gonna have to pay tax. I've only come across it one time where an agent did not tell their seller, who was a foreigner, about this tax. And when they found out about it, the day of closing, because they didn't have the proper documentation to be taxed, it created a large mess. Because now that person no longer wanted to sell the property. You're under contract. You have to sell the property. I did have an attorney sit in on that closing to inform the buyers they were going to be sued for specific performance if they did not go through with the sale. And we gave them an additional 24 hours to collect the documentation that they needed so that they could pay that tax. You know, when I got an agent that comes to me and says, my buyers are literally sitting in the driveway in their U-Haul, and they said they're not gonna close, they're gonna close, one way or the other. Might not be that day, but I'm gonna work on getting it closed. FHA loan notice, so if the current loan on the house is FHA, it is an assumable loan if the seller wants it to be. Seller has to agree to it. Buyer still has to get qualified for it, but they would assume that loan. You don't see too many assumptions right now. I think what we're gonna see in about a year from now is we're gonna start to see more homes probably assume other loans because of the interest rates. So look for that in the near future. Legal construction. We're not talking about the house. We're talking about this is a legally binding contract. And everything in this contract has been legally constructed. The seller's not relying on any information from the agent. The buyer's not relying on any information from the agent. They're only doing what they need to do. And this is an agreement that will be interpreted by Maryland law. So what if the buyer's from Texas? Doesn't matter. It's going to be interpreted by Maryland law. And then you're going to check the addendum that are going to be attached. You're always going to check consent for dual agency. You're always going to check the lead-based paint. You're always going to check the financial condition of the property. You're always going to check the inclusions, exclusions, the lockbox, the lead poisoning. The only time you'll check the disclosure disclaimer is if they are not exempt and they have to fill it out. If they're a non-resident seller, if they have deferred water and sewer, and if it was built before 1978 or before, the pamphlet protects your family from lead in your home. And then any other addendum that you want to put into the listing is going to go here. Sellers are going to sign it. Company name's going to go here, and then you're going to sign it as an authorized representative. Anybody have any questions with the exclusive right to sell? There's also an exclusive right to sell land. So if you're selling just land, you're going to use the exclusive right to sell land. And that goes through pretty much the same thing. If you're working with a homeowner that wants to lease their property out, they want to rent it out, then you're going to do an exclusive right to lease. The only difference is, instead of selling it, you're leasing it. So typically, the only difference is going to be that the change that you're going to make is going to be the compensation paid. I always put 1 month's rent. And then when you put it into the MLS, you will either pay half a month's rent to the other person, or 3/4 months, or a quarter month, whatever you want to do. Or a flat fee, either one.
Where is that? I mean, I have to pay for that.
That's probably not in the packet, but that's in,
The exclusive right to lease.
yeah.
I just don't know where you put the 1 month thing.
Well, you should have a bunch of pages.
Oh.
It's like 7 pages. It'll be under the broker's compensation. Number 14.
one of two.
That's something different.
Um,
I don't think you had the exclusive right to lease in there.
Okay.
Just like I don't think you had the exclusive right to do land.
Yeah.
But these are all found in the MAR folder in DocuSign. There's a lockbox addendum that you'll have to add to all listings and rentals. If it is a rental, the lockbox addendum, basically, this is what, it's a 2-page document. It says the lockbox addendum to exclusive right to sell or exclusive right to lease. It says that you're gonna put a lockbox on the property. People are gonna have access to that lockbox. The people that are gonna have access to the lockbox are gonna be other agents. Under no certain terms should anyone else have access to that lockbox. So if somebody does happen to show up at your house and they have a lockbox combination to get in, they were given that lockbox combination by the company that sets up the showing to an agent. We all use showing time pretty much anymore. Only an agent can gather that information. If that agent doesn't show up at the property, but the buyer shows up at the property, you need to know. That's illegal. So under no certain terms can you give that combination to a potential buyer. Don't do it. You will lose your license. That's basically what this says. They have to sign it knowing that that's going to happen. And if it's a rental and a tenant is involved, the tenant must sign. If the tenant does not sign, then can't really sell the property. Because they have to get permission for you to allow access to the property. We went over dual agency. The way dual agency is supposed to be signed, just so everybody knows, when you're working with a seller on dual agency, you're going to put that you're working with the seller, and they're going to sign it. The buyer, in the disclosures, if it is truly a dual agency situation, the buyer that you're working with already signed another one of these as the buyer. But if you're going to write an offer on an intra-office listing, then you're going to use the one that was in the disclosures from the seller that says that the seller allows dual agency. The buyer is going to sign next that they are consenting to dual agency. And then the seller is going to sign the bottom, saying that the seller affirms and acknowledges that they did agree to dual agency with that buyer. If you're on a team, make sure you use the notification of dual agency within a team. Lead-based paint form. Oh, here, Jen. Don't scroll yet, whoever's in control. This is for a team,
Okay.
okay? Now, you guys, if you want to remove this up here and put your logo or whatever, you can, okay? Or you can just leave it there and use it like this. This just says this is suggested language, okay? For notification of dual agency within a team. A team in Maryland is somebody that's been licensed for 3 years or more, or they're a husband and wife. And they work on a regular basis together. They represent themselves to the public as being one entity, and that they themselves are referred to as a team or group. Okay. Okay. Dual agency. not the agency, lead-based paint. If the house was built prior to 1978. Oh, good. That's the lead poisoning prevention. That's the one we want. If the house was built prior to 1978, the seller will initial here. Okay? If the house, if the date of construction is uncertain, they will sign it here. If neither one of those places have been initialed, then you're going to scroll to the bottom and sign the document. Because it was built after 1978. There's nothing to disclose. Only if the house was built in 1978 or before, initialed here, will you initial any of these as a seller. The first one says that they know of lead-based paint. So if they know of lead-based paint, they'll initial here under AI. If they have no records and they don't know of it, they're going to initial under AII. They have no knowledge of lead-based paint. If they have records that there may be lead-based paint, they're going to initial the second one, or the first one, sorry. And they provide, that you have to also provide the documentation that shows that there's lead-based paint. If they don't have any reports, then they'll initial the second one. Most people end up initialing the second one and the second one. Oh, you
Did
don't?
you find it?
No.
Because I'm like, I found the other one,
Yeah.
the prevention program disclosure, but I didn't find that one.
Well, let's take a look here. I think you're right. But that's okay. That's what it looks like.
Now, which one do you want in command? That one?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the lead paint.
That's the one.
And then,
Okay.
and then scroll up a little bit. Whoever's doing that too, thank you. I couldn't figure out how to do it. A little bit more. Okay. As a listing agent, you're going to initial here acknowledging that you told them about this information. And then the seller's going to sign, and then you're going to sign it. And then, of course, the buyer will initial in this section the appropriate ones and then sign it. The next one's going to be the lead poisoning prevention program. This one is also used no matter when the property was built. So the thought from the lawyer on this one is you put the property address. If the property was ever used as a rental, or if the property is going to be used as a rental in the future, you must disclose to them that all rental properties have to be enrolled in the lead poisoning prevention program if they were constructed prior to 1978. If they were constructed after 1978, there's nothing to fill out. They did not register, so they would just put that it's not registered and then sign it. If it was registered, then they're going to put that it was registered. And if it was registered, whether or not there's been an issue with a tenant or somebody that was in there claiming that they got lead poisoning from this property. You have to disclose that. That's what does this. That's why no matter what year it was built. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, just as sure as I'm standing here, there are other brokers and there are other agents that are going to say, we don't have to sign this. Because it wasn't built before 1978. Okay, fine. Make a note in command. Does everybody know how to make a note in command? So, if you go to note from there. So the way that you're gonna do it is up top of that little bell, or if you have the document pulled open, you can add a note. It'll say add comment. Or if you go up to that little bell, if you use the little bell, you're always gonna put the @ symbol, and then it'll pull up different names. I'll be one of those names. And write me a note, agent refused to sign. Because I'll look, and if I see those notes ahead of time, then I won't reject it. And then I'll deal with it later.
The agent refused to sign or the?
The agent, your buyer and seller is always gonna do what you tell them to do. They're gonna sign it no matter what.
What agent?
It's always gonna be another agent that's gonna refuse to have their buyer
Oh, to have their buyer.
sign it.
Okay.
It wasn't built before, it wasn't built
You don't need to sign that.
before 1978. You don't have to sign it, because that agent knows best, even though he didn't read the document, even though he didn't attend the class with Chuck Caskey, he knows best. So rather than have you argue with him over, just make a note of it, and I'll deal with it later. Next one is disclosure of leased items. In Maryland, there is a separate addendum if they have leased items. Leased items can include fuel tanks, solar panels, alarm systems, water treatment systems, and anything else that they may lease for the property. You have to make a buyer aware of that. The most popular one, I'm going to show you, the two most popular ones are going to be propane tanks. Propane tanks are usually never owned, but you do run across some that aren't. And solar panels, not too many of those are owned. Alarm systems are usually owned, and they just provide a monthly service. But they may have one from like Dynamark or something like that that is leased, or Glessner, especially in Washington County. So they just have to note if those items are leased. The next one is the notice to the buyer and the seller of the buyer's rights and the seller's obligations under Maryland single-family residential property condition disclosure law. This is the one, the two-page document, that if the seller is exempt from doing the disclosure disclaimer, it's the only one they're going to sign that has anything to do with disclosures. That's a mouthful, ain't it? Somebody went to sleep.
I don't think we have that one there.
Oh, this is an important one to have too.
I don't see it.
All right, hang on. Take 5. Okay. Boy, you gotta be kidding me. They're supposed to fill up the glass candy bowl, not that little wooden box. Good Lord. Get them back here. This is an important one to have. Notice to the buyer and seller, this is the one, the seller has to complete this one, whether they're exempt or not. And it goes into what they have to disclose about the property. They have to disclose everything about the property, even any material defect or latent defect. Next one, residential property disclosure disclaimer statement. People get so confused with this one. They don't understand why. Okay, so this is the Maryland Residential Property Disclosure and Disclaimer Statement. If they are not exempt and they have to fill this out, you're going to put the property address and the legal description. If it does not have the legal description, it's going to get sent back to you. You can find the legal description in the county tax record. You can find that in bright. And it will actually say on the tax record, county description. That's what you're looking for, the county legal description. That's what's going to go there. Okay? If they're going to do the disclosure statement, go ahead and scroll up just a little bit, Michelle. If they're going to do the disclosure statement, you will start to fill this out from this point forward. How long they've owned the property and these items about the property. And you'll continue to fill throughout on the next 2 pages. This is part of the disclosure. It's also part of the disclaimer. Maryland used to do it where this was part of the disclosure and that was it. So you are going to put how long they've owned the property, the water supply, the sewer, if there's a garbage disposal, if there's a dishwasher, the heating, the air conditioning, and the hot water. And then if they're going to do the disclosure, they will, you will not, they will fill this out. Now, a lot of times you might get a seller that says, "Do I have to fill all that out?" Yes, you do. Or you can do the disclaimer. It's up to you. You have to do one or the other. You don't do both. So when you do the disclosure, after it's filled out, the seller signs it, and that's it. If the seller decides that they want to do a disclaimer, this is the disclaimer. I see it all the time, and I know it's not true. Does the seller have actual knowledge of any latent defects? Yes, no, if yes, specify. I know they know what's wrong with their house. They always say none known and sign it. When they go to court, I'm sure they're going to be asked a lot of questions, and this is why you don't fill this out. Because one of the questions they're going to ask the seller is, who filled this out? If the seller says, "Oh, my agent did," you're in trouble. Always let them fill it out in their own writing. If they're the ones that put no, none known, it's on them, not you. And then they'll sign it.
Are we supposed to have those pages?
Yeah. And just so everyone's aware, on the bottom of it, it says it's a 4-page document.
Thank you.
So if they do just the disclaimer, how many pages am I gonna get? What was that?
So you're taking them all.
4 pages.
So that all goes, okay. Cause I think that I know I pulled those apart, so you want all 4 pages. That makes sense now, I mean,
4-page document,
yeah, I know I pulled those apart.
all
so that makes
4
sense.
pages.
Okay.
The next one, the inclusions and exclusions. This one, here. This one, I don't know why or how people confuse this.
I don't think they
It's
have that.
very important. This one says it's the inclusions and exclusions and the utilities addendum to the exclusive right to sell. This is the only time that you use this and submit it with your paperwork, is on a listing. Because it says it is for the sole purposes of assisting the agent in preparing an offer, and it is not to be part of the contract of sale. There are lazy agents out there that on the contract of sale, because on the contract of sale, it has this section right here. And they'll say, see attached. Can you attach that to a contract of sale? No, you can't. It says it's not part of the contract of sale. There's no place for the buyer to sign this. This is only signed by the seller. If a buyer signs it, an attorney will not acknowledge it. A judge will not acknowledge it because it's not part of the contract of sale. Don't put it in your paperwork. Don't say, see attached. If an agent sends it to you and says, see attached, send it back and tell them it's not part of the contract. They've got to fill it out on the contract. This is just for the purposes of the buyer's agent to write down exactly what's on here onto the contract of sale. Now, I know that Larry and Lana are probably fit to be tied right now and trying to talk. Because in Garrett County, they have an inclusions and exclusions addendum that is appropriate for a buyer and seller to sign. And so do agents in Montgomery County. They use the G-card forms. Everybody else, this should not be in your contract. This should not be in your contract of sale. Only the listing agreement. Okay. Any questions with that one?
How long is it?
The class? We still probably get about 20 minutes and probably a lot longer. So I'm just gonna kind of go.
No, I just have to leave for my coaching at 12.
Okay, that's fine. At 12, we'll stop. Next one. Ta-da. Next one should be the financial condition of the property. That has to be included in the listing because you need to know what the payoff is on the house, if there is a payoff. You also need to know if there's a second mortgage, if there's a home equity line of credit. You also need to know if there's any liens on the property, any tax deficiencies on the property, and any of that. That all has to be disclosed. Okay? That's what this one's for. Next one. Oh boy. Go ahead, Michelle. Let's see what's next on that one. Keep going. Keep going. Go ahead, keep going.
There's nothing else.
Oh, there's nothing else?
No.
We're missing a bunch of documents. Okay. So the next documents that are going to be in here are, and these are going to pertain to condo associations and HOAs. So we are actually almost done. So if there's a condo association, there's documents that the seller needs to fill out, and they will look like this. What it's going to have is, and there's several documents, there's actually 3 condo documents that need to be filled out. And there's actually 3 HOA documents that need to be filled out.
She didn't get this.
No, she doesn't have
that
them.
one, okay.
Oh, yes, she does.
Never mind.
So the resale, okay, so the resale document basically goes into who the condo association is, how much the condo association fee is, what it includes. For a lender, you're gonna need to get all kinds of documentation together for the lender. They're gonna wanna see the articles of incorporation, and all that good stuff. So when you're doing your listing, make sure that your seller knows he's gonna have to gather all that information for him. And then the buyer will sign off on it. Once they receive the transmittal of the documents, they'll sign off on it. It's confusing because Maryland uses 3 different documents for it. You need all of them. Same thing with an HOA. They use 2 different documents. You need both of them. One is letting people know that there is a condo. Another is letting them know that there's an HOA. And the other is when they receive the documents, because they had so much time to read those documents and agree to them. And then the final document is going to be to agree to the terms of those documents. HOA is going to be the same way. You have to provide that. Now, HOA documents. Your seller has to provide the condo docs and the HOA docs to a buyer. They can be rather expensive. So if it's an HOA or a condo association, I think the most expensive one is Claggett. Claggett will charge, and I think it's like $495 for those documents. Seller doesn't want to pay $495 for those documents. They might want to try and charge the buyer. You're not supposed to be able to charge the buyer for those documents. They are supposed to provide those documents to a buyer. They'll need to get a resale, what's known as a resale package for the buyer. So a lot of times sellers won't do that until after everything's been done and you're getting close to closing, then they'll pay for those documents. Okay? Because they're expensive. That should be it.
That's not anything that they would have when they purchase their home.
It is, but a resale package is gonna have all the updates that they've done to it. Because HOAs and condo associations periodically put out amendments to it, addendums to it, strike things from it, and they're supposed to keep them, pass on to somebody. So I always tell my sellers, you got your notebook, and if it's in Maryland, most times it looks like this. Make sure you keep that. Every time they send you something, you put it in there, so that way, when a buyer comes, you can have it sitting on the counter and they can look at it. They know that you have it, everything's been added to it, and it keeps you from spending
I would say
$495.
They don't have to then, if they keep everything. as
Yeah.
it is.
Would that be substantial though? Because how would you know if they didn't throw, like, how would you know that they kept the addendums?
It was in your best interest.
Well,
But you
right,
don't.
I know.
But
Yeah,
when
that's
they
true.
order,
Maybe the ones
when
that
they
we
order the
have,
resale, they're still gonna order a resale package. They're-
Oh. Oh, okay.
So, that's all.
Is there another contract for us?
This afternoon?
No, just,
Yeah, we're gonna go over the next contract class is gonna be buyer agency contract.
when is
I think it's next Tuesday. Same time.
Do you have the team up calendar?
that? No.
There's a team up.
And the following, or no, it's not next Tuesday, it's next Tuesday's family reunion.
I'm gonna say that starts next week.
Did you get it in the email?
Oh,
How is that going to work?
Oh, there's a-
Just watch it at your own leisure,
It's an app.
or like what?
I don't know, I gotta figure it out because there's usually some really good breakouts. I know there's some breakouts that I wanna take.
It does say for Tuesday.
I was looking at the schedule last
but
night.
You said it won't be there because of.
Yeah, we got family reunion. Normally we'd be going.
That stinks.
I know. It's always nice when we go somewhere. We either go to, like one year we went to Anaheim, we've gone to, New Orleans.
Oh, so it's different every,
Yeah, it's always
because I
different.
think Remax was always Vegas.
We were to Dallas. Well, this year was supposed to be Vegas.
Yeah. That stinks.
Okay. I'll be
Yeah, it would've been warmer than here.
Yeah, for real, this week, yeah. Especially after what's
Well-
coming, or coming up, yeah.
Yeah, because this week it's gonna be snow. From what I was told this morning, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, get a break on Saturday and then Sunday, Monday. So that'll be interesting. But anyway, that's it. Anybody on screen got questions? I'm guessing not. Everybody stayed muted. We're good. Enjoy your day. Have fun. Nobody here has any questions?
No, I'll be back with my questions.
Okay.
So is everything that's on the list that was printed out, those should be all the things that we